All right, let's just jump right into it because today we're tackling a real rock and roll mystery, the story of the band Chicago. Seriously, how could one band be both this groundbreaking experimental rock powerhouse and a super smooth power ballad hit machine? Well, let's figure it out. So, on one side, you have the Chicago of the 1970s. This is the band that was mashing up jazz, classical, and rock into something nobody had ever heard before. Driven by this powerhouse horn section and the absolutely raw, soulful guitar of Terry Kath. Their music was complicated, sometimes political, and totally unapologetic. But then, you've got the Chicago of the 1980s, polished, super slick, and just dominated by synthesizers and the sky-high tenor vocals of Peter Cetera. They basically became masters of the power ballad, cranking out some of the biggest radio hits of the entire decade. So what gives? How does this even happen? How can one single group of musicians put out two catalogs of music that sound like they're from different planets? It's a heck of a story about ambition, tragedy, and, well, reinvention. To really understand how this all went down, we have to go back, way back, to the very beginning. Because Chicago's origin story, it's not like any other rock band from that time. You see, these guys weren't your typical self-taught rockers just messing around in a garage. Nope. The core members, James Pankow on trombone, Walter Perezider on woodwinds, and Lee Loughnane on trumpet, were all music majors at DePaul University. These were seriously trained musicians who had this kind of wild idea. What if we take all our training in classical and jazz and smash it together with the raw energy of rock and roll? And when they all got together, this original seven-man crew, man, it was a perfect storm of talent. You had Robert Lamb as the main songwriter, Danny Seraphine laying down this incredible jazz rock pulse on the drums, and they brought in Peter Cetera for that unmistakable high tenor voice. But the two sonic pillars, the real anchors, James Pankow, the genius who arranged the horns, and Terry Kath, the guitarist and singer who was, without a doubt, the soul of the band. And they weren't just skilled, these guys were on a whole other level. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. After seeing them play, the one and only Jimi Hendrix told Walter Perezider that he thought their guitarist, Terry Kath, was better than him. I mean, come on. When the god of guitar thinks you're the best, you know you're onto something special. So what they created with all this talent was something brand new. They basically invented a genre we now call horn rock. Before Chicago, horns in a rock band were kind of decoration. But James Pankow was writing these arrangements where the trombone, trumpet, and sax weren't just in the background. They were a lead voice, a main character in the song, treating licks with the vocals and guitar. Just think of that iconic opening to 25 or 6 to 4. That's not just a riff, it's a declaration. It was a revolutionary sound, for real. So you have this incredible band of absolute virtuosos. The obvious next step is to put their faces on every album cover and turn them into huge rock stars, right? Wrong. They did the exact opposite. And you know what? It was a stroke of genius. Right from their second album, Chicago was almost never on their own covers. Instead, the real star was their logo. This was such a brilliant strategy because it made the brand, not the guys in the band, the main focus. It gave them this timeless, almost corporate vibe, and just let the music do all the talking. And by numbering their albums with Roman numerals, they made it feel like you were collecting this grand, unfolding body of work. And the way they played with this whole concept was just fantastic. The logo was never boring, it was a canvas. For their 10th album, Chicago X, they turned it into this massive half-eaten chocolate bar. How cool is that? Then for Chicago 13, it became this sleek skyscraper, reflecting the city's architecture. It was this clever, consistent thing that fans could recognize instantly. And get this, on Chicago 14, it became a giant thumbprint. This branding was so powerful that it helped the band survive huge changes in its members and its sound. The logo was the constant. But that whole innovative, experimental first chapter of the band, well, it came to a sudden and tragic end in the late 1970s. This is the moment where absolutely everything changed. It was a brutal 1-2 punch. First, in 1977, they split with James William Guercio, the producer who had basically guided their entire career from the start. Then, just a year later, the unthinkable happened. Terry Kath, the guy Hendrix raved about, the voice of the band's rock and roll heart, died in a tragic accident involving a gun. And look, this wasn't just about losing a band member. They lost their soul. Kath was that raw, bluesy, improvisational fire that balanced out the band's more polished classical side. The creative hole he left behind was just massive, and it sent the band completely off course. So, they're facing this totally uncertain future. Sales are down, and they're at a crossroads. They made a decision that would make a lot of their early fans angry, but it would also lead to their biggest commercial success ever. They completely reinvented themselves. They brought in this hotshot producer named David Foster, and he came in with a whole new formula for radio success. First, he took the band's signature horn section and pushed it way into the background. Second, he swapped out their organic sound for slick synthesizers and drum machines, and he often brought in outside session musicians. And maybe most important, he focused almost entirely on writing power ballads that were just perfect for Peter Cetera's incredible voice. And did it work? Oh yeah, it worked. The 1984 album Chicago 17, which had hits like You're the Inspiration, sold over 6 million copies in the US alone. To this day, it's the biggest selling album of their entire career. And just to put that into perspective for you, their 70s albums were huge successes, right? They were selling around 2 million copies each, on average. Well, Chicago 17 tripled that. You can imagine the commercial pressure to just stick with that new formula was absolutely enormous. They had become a hit-making machine. But after years of just churning out ballad after ballad, the band started to get restless. They missed being that experimental rock band with horns, and they decided to try and fight their way back to their artistic roots. So in 1993, they poured their hearts and souls into an album called Stone of Sisyphus. This was supposed to be their big return to form, a complex, ambitious, horn-heavy record that sounded way more like their 70s stuff than anything they'd done in more than a decade. They were fired up creatively. But then, in what has to be a soul-crushing blow, the record label just flat out rejected it. Can you believe that? They listened to this artistic statement and basically said, where are the hits? The album was shelved, locked away in a vault for 15 years. It was a brutal lesson in the battle between art and commerce. But even with a setback like that, Chicago's legacy was already set in stone. I mean, we're talking about a band that has sold over 100 million records. In 2016, they finally got inducted into both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Grammy Hall of Fame. And they are still touring today, which is a testament to their incredible staying power. And so at the end of the day, the tale of the two Chicagos makes us ask this really fundamental question. Was their 80s makeover a smart act of survival that let them thrive for decades? Or was it a betrayal of the artistic vision that made them so great in the first place? You know, there's no easy answer here, and honestly, that's what makes their story so absolutely fascinating.